What is a fact that you thought everybody knew but apparently, you were the only one? It's genuinely shocking the number of people who don't realize reindeer are real animals. Edit. Another fact related to this thread is that caribou and reindeer, even though they're the same species, some countries distinguish them by name and some don't, which is where the confusion comes from. Web link. Similarly, my niece thought bats were made up for Halloween, like witches and zombies. She's 3 and bats aren't seen in our area, so, yeah, logical conclusion. That's quite sweet. And good reasoning on her part, even if it's wrong. Also, the reason I don't actually judge adults for not knowing about reindeer, they never really come up unless it's Christmas. I live next to a park with reindeer, and there's literally nothing more delightful than being able to physically show someone a mythical animal. Also, narwhals? I always thought they were made up, like mermaids and unicorns. In the US, odd-number highways are north/south, even-numbered highways are east/west. Be aware that there are 2 systems in play for numbering exits, and they depend on state choice. If you're traveling, be sure to know what you're going to see. Sometimes exit numbers are exit 15 is the next exit after 14, and other times it's exit 15 is 15 miles from where the highway started. My husband still can't wrap his head around the second system. He acts like I have all the distances memorized instead of realizing that exit 204 is exactly 103 miles from exit 307. I literally just explained this to my 27, therefore north to south, year-old sister the other day. She was mind blown. You know the 3 dots on a coconut? One of them is fake, and you can stab it with a steak knife and easily carve out a hole big enough to get a straw through. Oh, and just in case, you don't need to use a lot of force to check, the knife should sink into the fake dot extremely easily and bounce off the real ones. Do not go all in on stabbing a coconut. Don't go stabbing coconuts, please stick to the mangoes and bananas you're used to. What do you mean, fake? What do 2 of them do that the third doesn't? They are all real holes. The coconut grows using only one of them, so it's the soft one. The other 2 are fused. It's natural. Kind of like the soft spot on a baby's head, which can similarly be opened with a steak knife to allow easy access with a straw. Guess I haven't seen enough coconuts to even know there are holes on them at all. I remember trying to cut into one as a child and having a tough time. If you press the Windows key and the period key at the same time, it pulls up a whole list of emojis. That's a life pro tip right there. I weirdly read that as pro-life tip the first time. Ruby red grapefruit. Is the result of atomic gardening? Is the result of atomic gardening? The 50s were a wild time with ideas of how to harness the atom. Fascinating. Web link. That K pauses YouTube videos. Spacebar does it, but it also does the last thing you click to edit, what spacebar did. More than that, L skips 10 seconds and J goes back 10 seconds. It's from editing software. Professional editors use JKL often to move around the edit. Slightly differently than YouTube though. K is still pause, J is rewind, L is play/fast forward. If you hit multiple times it goes faster. If you hit J or L while holding down K, it will move 1 frame at a time. QuickTime uses JKL too, but it uses it like editing software instead of the way YouTube does. So much legal stuff that I feel people should have learned in high school. When you are the victim of a crime, you don't need a lawyer and you aren't in charge of prosecuting the defendant. Criminal cases are always the government versus the defendant, so the government is represented by the Office of the District/Commonwealth U.S. Attorney. Pleading not guilty is how you get a trial. I can't believe how many people say he is such a liar for pleading not guilty when everyone knows he did it. Well, pleading not guilty does not mean he didn't do it. It means he is making the state prove their case, which he is constitutionally able to do. Just get a restraining order. No, you can't just get one. There is a standard to meet. It varies by jurisdiction, but generally, your life/safety has to be threatened. So no, You can't get a restraining order against that company that called you 3 times. On the topic of restraining orders, if you do get one, they don't require positive action of the restrained. That is, if you have a restraining order against Joe, and you walk into Applebee's and Joe is sitting there, Joe doesn't have to leave. Either you leave, or you've basically waived the restraining order until one of you departs voluntarily. You can't use a restraining order to repel people like a magnet. You can't use a restraining order to repel people like a magnet. True, very common misunderstanding. And just because you later decide to drop the charges, doesn't mean the state will agree to that. They can continue on without your consent. It makes it really hard to take to trial if the victim doesn't cooperate, though. This happens most frequently in domestic violence cases, because it's very common for victims of DV to backpedal even if they were the ones that originally reported an incident, even to the point of defending the accused/denying any wrongdoing. Very disheartening to see. When you are the victim of a crime, you don't need a lawyer and you aren't in charge of prosecuting the defendant. And incidentally, that means pressing charges is an imaginary concept that people got from TV shows. A guy stole my bike once, and I found it again and got him busted by the cops. They idiotically leaked my name to him and then let him go because it didn't warrant an arrest, so he looked me up in the phone book and called me begging me not to press charges. I was still furious, so I cussed him out and said I was going to ask for the maximum penalty. He cried and cussed back, and we both hung up. Imagine my embarrassment when I learned that charges weren't even up to me, and the cops really didn't care about this guy. He got a harsher penalty from his school than from the cops. Edit. Sorry, I mean the idea of a victim choosing to press charges or not. A victim can certainly decide whether to be a cooperative witness, but it's the DA who decides whether or not to press charges. If the victim doesn't want any charges, then the DA may or may not take that into account when they make their decision. You can eat the skin of a kiwi. To be fair, you can eat just about anything. Whether you should or not is up for debate. Everything is edible, but some things are edible only once. Eat this, and you won't need to eat again for the rest of your life. Yes, but it's polite to ask first. Nah, we don't mind. We have public health, so tuck in. Poor bird. Poor New Zealanders. I just yesterday had a close friend of mine, mind you, he's very knowledgeable of computers, be starstruck when I mentioned middle mouse button could be used on Chrome to open stuff in new tabs or close said tabs. He mostly uses keyboard shortcuts, so he just used Ctrl plus LMB to do the same, which I had no knowledge was a thing. Don't forget Ctrl plus SHFT plus T opens the last tab you closed. Even if you close the browser. I always open things in new tabs and using Ctrl plus LMB. How did I not know this? Thank you for the info. There's actually male calico cats. Of course, they have a different variation of chromosomes, XXY instead of XY in most cases, but they do exist. I had one as a kid and everyone told me it was impossible, haha. 1 in 3,000 calicos will be a male. If it's a male, then only 1 in 10,000 will be fertile. Also, calico is not a breed of cat. Many different breeds can have a calico mutation. By the same token, lots of cats aren't breeds, really. Every time someone posts a picture of a cat with an interesting coat color or something, inevitably, someone goes, "Oh, what breed is that?" Like they can just go to a breeder and get one exactly like it. There are cat breeds, Oriental Shorthair, Abyssinian, Japanese Bobtail, etc., but the average cat you see on the internet is just a moggy. It may happen to have an interesting color or pattern, but it's not a special breed, per se. You zoom in and out by holding Control and scrolling your mouse wheel. It is so frustrating watching someone fumble for the zoom controls. But I don't want to be a dick and call out the solution. Just use your mouse wheel. You can also scroll horizontally with Shift, plus, scroll wheel. I always see people clicking and dragging the horizontal scroll bar, yet they do use the scroll wheel to do a vertical scroll. Edit. I use this all the time and thought it was pretty ubiquitous, but it seems I overestimated it. It works in most of the software I use. It also does in all the browsers I've tried. It also works in Finder on Mac OS, but not in Windows Explorer or any default Windows programs like Notepad. So your mileage may vary. Or click on U-Wheel button and navigate like a Chad. Wait till you tell them about copy and paste. The fact that gum, when swallowed, doesn't stay in your system for 7 years or whatever you've been told as a child. It just immediately passes through your system. I have had this conversation too many times with people whenever I swallow my gum because there isn't a trash can around. Cyclists shave their legs to make massages more comfortable and for hygiene purposes in case of an accident. It has nothing to do with aerodynamics. However, swimmers do shave for aerodynamics, or I guess hydrodynamics. Having really hairy legs does in fact make a noticeable difference in drag. Source: Swimmer. Edit: I admit it took me longer than it should have to realize why people were mentioning drag techniques. Swimming isn't the only time having really hairy legs makes a noticeable difference in drag. It also helps with water polo as well. Although not nearly as important as swimming, it still helps with getting across the pool even if it is just by shaving a second or less. Source: I am a water polo player. It feels aero. The Wind Tunnel YouTube channel tested this. It does help with aerodynamics. But not a whole lot. Doesn't automotive wax help cars become more aerodynamic? If this is true, then shave, coat self in automotive wax, glide through space and time. Penguins only living in the South Pole while polar bears live in the North Pole. Some people think that polar bears and penguins both interact with one another. Penguins are in the southern hemisphere, but not only at the pole. You can find them in the Galapagos, which is basically on the equator. Edit: yes, everyone, there are penguins all over the southern hemisphere. I was just trying to say they reach as far north as the equator. But you can find them on all southern continents. Edit 2, though, honestly, the Antarctic colonies aren't doing great without the sheet ice they need for breeding. RIP Emperor penguins. PFFT. I've seen one in a zoo in Oslo. There are penguins in South America too. It took me longer in life to learn that there weren't polar bears in Antarctica than I really want to admit to the public internet. I knew about the penguins, at least, though. Till there weren't polar bears in Antarctica. I can admit it. Arctic and Antarctic just mean bear and no bears respectively, but that was down to the fact the Arctic/North Pole faces the bear constellations. LASER is an acronym for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. SCUBA is self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. FUBAR is effed up beyond all recognition. There are 3 levels of military operation status. SNAFU, situation normal, all effed up. TARFU, things are really effed up. FUBAR, effed up beyond all recognition. IT world has lots of fun acronyms too. CAPTCHA is a completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart. TWAIN is technology without an interesting name. GNU is news not Unix. Don't forget PEBCAC, problem exists between keyboard and chair. In a formal meal where there are multiple forks/utensils on both sides of the plate, they're placed so that you can work from the outside inwards for each course. I learned this from the movie Titanic. I learned from Kingsman that it is should have instead of should have. I obviously don't think I'm the only one who knows that, but I'm baffled by how often I read that mistake. I've honestly only ever seen that mistake in native speakers and it baffles me. Like, how does it make sense? I think it's cause people mishear should've. Which always makes me think it's someone who reads almost exclusively text/social media, and doesn't read much that's professionally written. It's an extremely common phrase, and you will never, ever see it as should've in anything written by any kind of professional writer. In other words, people who write should've are minimally literate, and I will judge them as probably being poorly educated and uninformed. Don't forget should've is a word. I knew this but stole the whole text directly from Google search. Percentages are reversible. So, 16%, of 25 is the same thing as 25%, of 16, 4. Only one is easier to calculate in your mind than the other. Now, the trick isn't great for numbers where you can't do either percentage in your head, like 17%, of 39 or 39%, of 17. F knows how much that is. 5.5? 6? Around that, pretty good still. The reason why this works is simply the commutative property of multiplication, the property that says that you can multiply things in any order and not change the result. A percent is just a number divided by 100, or multiplied by 0.01 if you prefer. So if you have x% of y, it would be 0.01xy. If you have y% of x, it would be 0.01yx. Clearly, these two expressions will always evaluate to the same result for all real numbers. Also, you can multiply one side and divide another by the same amount. Don't like 22% of 50? What about 11% of 100? This is exactly how I do all calculations in my head. For instance, payroll. How much did I gross for the last pay period? 80 hours at $18.50 per hour. Double one side, have the other, and continue until it's a simple calculation. 18.50 by 80 becomes 37 by 40. 37 by 40 becomes 74 by 20, which you can flip the 0 to the other side to make 740 by 2 equals 1480. That is like 5 different steps though. I agree with the first one, but then I would just break it into 30 by 40 and 7 by 40 and add those two together. Whoa, you just blew my mind. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube and share them with your friends. We welcome your comments below. Press to start another of our videos.